My name is Don Sinclair, and the last 10 years of my ministry, from 1986 to 1996 and retirement, was spent here at Bering Church. I've been in the ministry for 46 years before retirement, and we were appointed out of Dangerfield, where I lived when our son was killed, to get us away from a threatening situation that came from our gay son through the life of a young girl who had chosen him to talk to about incest with her father for 10 years. She had begun to think maybe that's not normal. And we got involved in that, and there was this, the father was what I call a totalitarian personality. They make the rules, and if anybody messes up their little arrangement, there's nothing they won't do to you. There's no guidance, there's no limit, there's no outside governance of limitation. There's nothing that a totalitarian personality will not do to somebody who messes up their arrangement. And five weeks after the girl reported the father, our son was killed here in Houston. Time had passed. He had moved to the university, and the girl had moved to Dallas to hide out, and finally she had to tell, and 5 weeks later our son was killed. Because our son could testify in court that he had talked to the girl before the father's story about his disowning the children, the date he had set, that when this all started, and our son had been talking to the girl for 6 months before that. And so had I. So I reported it to the police as to what I thought this man had to do, and that was to kill me. And I felt he would shoot up the church while he was at it. He would come on Sunday, and he hated religion, and they moved me from Dangerfield to Fairbanks Church on the edge of Houston. And 10 days later, the day before his trial, he went in the Baptist church. We publicized it, put the new pastor's picture in the paper so they would know that I was not over there. And he went in the Baptist church with guns blazing and had enough ammunition. He's parked halfway between them. He was going to both. And he, almost a total failure, he didn't kill but 5 people. Standing up singing hymns from the back. So a lot of disturbance there over that, and our son was dead now, and they moved me out to interrupt his plans. And he the day before his trial tore his towel into 1-inch strips in a cell that the mayor of the town had built for people so they could not commit suicide. Padded cell with a low bar on the door and all that, but he tied that towel to that door and reached down and got his feet and held them until he was dead. He wasn't going into a courtroom where the authorities could tell him to shut up and sit down, and where the people were going to judge him. He could not tolerate that. But I don't know what our bishop at the time that I came to burying knew. I had not talked with him about it. The word, of course, was circulating, and because that was quite an event that had involved this gay young man, and we didn't know he was gay, and the policeman asked us if we knew, and we did not know, and knew nothing about it. The only thing I knew about homosexuality at that point in time was that it was caused by henpecked men and bossy women. And I really didn't know anything about homosexuality. But I had observed people's response to the subject being brought up for years, and it was always, the minute it's mentioned, the claws come out. And I thought, where does this anger come from, and what does it mean? But I didn't know the answer to those questions. But all I knew was that homosexual people were in trouble everywhere. That I knew. And I've never appreciated that fact about anybody, black people, women, or homosexuals. I just do not care for discrimination of any kind. But that's where I was when I came to Bering. We had looked into homosexuality, and I'd been angry at professors. I had all of the degrees that a minister is supposed to get, plus some others, and nobody had ever taught me anything about homosexuality. So the bishop probably knew something. Now, I did go in, and because he was new, and I had heard the bishop speak 3 times, and you get what we call good vibes. I was kind of angry at bishops. Had pretty well given up on bishops personally. But this man, I got good vibes from this man, and I went in to trap him and make him a defensive defender of the institution, and make him say something like, now, Don, and try to straighten me out. He did not do that. I would make my complaint about things, and he would make his complaint about things. It was somewhat the same story. And he was amazed that he was elected bishop. And I was amazed that he was ever elected bishop, but there he sat. And so we became good friends. I finally told him that I came in here to trap you. And I've tried all 9 things that I came to use on you, and you have not become the old defender of the faith or the institution. You stood out separate from that and talked to me as a fellow minister, same kind of story. But he's the man that sent me to Bering. I did complain to him about the way the church understands itself. And I said, my appointments have often been to punish me. For what, I don't know. They don't ever bother to tell me why. The term cut your throat gets thrown into our conversations. And I said, I've had my throat cut a few times, and I don't know why these people are doing it. The leadership is doing this. And he told me about some paranoid DSs he had at district superintendents. But that's the man that, I told him that if the church had a good understanding of its own being, that it is the mission. It's not an institution that has missions. It is the mission. It starts as that, it ends as that. And if the church had that kind of understanding, then my appointment would be a compliment. So it's just a different interpretation. But my appointment was really to punish me. And I have never understood why. But he had the district superintendent talk to me about Bering Church for several months, which is unusual. Usually the appointment is open and you get somebody in it, And they were talking about moving the pastor here. He'd been here a long time, and the DS talked to me. I was out on the edge of town several times about Bering Church. And I finally asked him, I said, I've learned a little about the church. I wanted to ask you, when this comes up in the cabinet meeting with the superintendents, does anybody else's name come up as a possible pastor for that church? And he said, no. Yours is the only one that. I was surprised at that. Bering had a great successful history in the 1940s and 1950s. It was an enormous sized church. It has 5 two-story buildings on its campus. The city council people came to Bering Church. Wealthy people came to Bering Church. There's a whole wing on St. Luke's Church out on Westheimer named after one of the people who left Bering Church. And so when I came to Bering Church, things were not doing so well. Houston had been late getting the financial crunch. We escaped it for a while, and people were coming to Houston to get jobs. But suddenly we got hit. And it was right after the flight to the suburbs where people left First Methodist Church and Bering Church and formed new churches out on the west side of Houston. They lived out there. And that's the way the church always builds new churches and spreads. And but Bering had lost a lot of its financial base, and through a rather natural causes, and it had been having quite a struggle for a long while. And when I came, they were $70,000 in debt and couldn't even pay the interest on it. And they had really been struggling for 2 years over whether or not they needed to sell this property and start over somewhere else. They were not sure. They were asking that question, and it was a possibility. This property has a lot of value to it. There were people here who had been trying to help decide that question. And one of those is Esther Hauser, who for 2 years had a meeting every week, every month, asking that question and proposing and writing down plans of what they might do, to stay or to go. What would be the big plan that they put together? She did that, even though sometimes she was the only person at the meeting. She'd held it together for 2 years. And she had what was at that point called the grand plan. And had it all printed up, and it was available for us. And after I'd been here 3 months, I had a meeting with the officials, about 20 of them, and we were talking about, they were telling me all of this stuff that was true, and yet sad. A lady named Mary Podoff, who's one of those really special people that's around, carried around with her on a little dolly thing books of financial records of the money that had been given as memorials to people who died from the family or from the friends. And the Bering Church had decided they would keep that money separate, and they would use it to buy furniture or to buy water fountains or things that they needed around the church, and they would do that in relation to the family. She kept up such good records on that she, whenever they got ready to buy something, they would figure out the cost, and they would check the records, and if there was about that much money given for one of the people that had died, the members, she'd contact the family and ask them if they would like to have this done with that money. And it was just that beautiful the way it was arranged, but the money was all gone. She had an awful time explaining that to me, what is in the bag, and she'd say, there's a bunch of books about financial records, but the money's not there. And I kept worrying about has somebody broken the law here? And yet she finally got it clear to me. She'd say, Don, you kind of have to put your head on a little sideways before you understand this. But these records are real, but the money has been used up to pay bills and to keep the church going. And it was not breaking the law, it was just breaking a tradition. And the money was available there, it was in the church treasury. The church had decided to use it this way, and I asked her, what did you do the first time they started taking money out of that? It was $40,000. She said, I screamed. I screamed. And I said, Mary, I want you screaming again, because this church cannot regain its footing. It cannot be well until that money gets replaced. So one of our goals is to put that money back in that fund and make those books alive again that you carry. She carried them to every meeting she went to with little Dolly. It's one of those bags that when you have to have more space, you unzip another round and it gets bigger. And she did that for years. And we finally got the money back in there. We were up to about 30,000, and we had begun to break into financial daylight. And we had a man who had AIDS roll himself up in a blanket, write his will, roll himself up in a blanket, and took a bunch of his pills and died there in his couch. Left us his house and his bank account. And that gave other people ideas. And so homes were donated. Furnishings began to be donated into the program that Kathy had started and gotten Mary Parker involved in. And Mary says, little did I ever imagine that my greatest gift and privilege would be to be selling other people's junk. But it was not junk. It was really fine furniture. And a lot of great things were given and still are given to the church. Mary had connections beyond church connections that put finer furniture from large estates into that program, and it now furnishes about $80,000 a year for this support network that for AIDS, HIV/AIDS thing. But in that meeting of about 20 people, after they had talked, telling me what all was going on, they finally summed it up. We've got 5 two-story buildings, and we can't even afford to have them dusted. That's the way they said it to me. We had Leisure Learning University teaching quail hunting and auto repair and cooking and flower arrangements, anything that somebody wanted to teach, they could use our buildings. We had 8 AA meetings every week in the building, and that was because we weren't using them, and they were available, and the judges who sentenced people to AA knew that the church was here and the nature of this church, which I need to pay great homage to this church in the past, because it's been this way all its life. Fantastic church. And it was started by German immigrants, and it was at the time they were digging a ship channel out to get ships up here from Galveston. and Galveston and Houston was kind of seeing who could become the biggest port city. And we had to dig out the ship channel, but a yellow fever epidemic started. And you can't have that kind of information publicized, because the ships do not want to come into a port that has a yellow fever epidemic. Well, Bearing Church was located downtown Houston. They started nursing, caregiving units. This church did, and showed the city how to take care of people in their homes. Yellow fever was taken care of, and the people of the church got the city of Houston to nurse those people in their homes and let them be treated by the doctors in their homes, and we got past it. Yellow fever disappeared, ship channel went ahead, the sailors kept coming in. But then I suppose the next thing was the swine flu epidemic after World War I. And it killed 500,000 people in this country, including my mother's first husband and my father's first wife, 200 miles north of Houston. Again, this church organized care teams, went into the homes to help stop this swine flu epidemic. Same fear as the yellow fever, that we would destroy our developing port city image and people would not want to come in here. Got past that, and you come up into the 30s, and when I was a child, polio happened. And the same thing happened to this congregation. Again, they got together and showed Houston how to take care of sick people in polio and their iron lung situations, and it was so frightening that my mother wouldn't let me go swimming. They didn't know where it was coming from. So we had this kind of thing, and then the AIDS happened during my time. And this congregation was sitting in that meeting, 20 people, and I just asked them, well, I asked Bayless Melton, who was sitting on my right. The air conditioning went out. This was August. And the air conditioning in the fellowship hall went out. And that means, I didn't know how it worked or anything. And he said, well, there goes another air handler. And I said, now explain to me what you mean by that. He said, there's 11 of them in the church. We just fixed one for $1,800. And that means there's 9 more to go. They're old, big fans that blow across water-cooled radiators and pipes running through these buildings. And they're old, and we can't fix them. We can't afford anymore. I said, great. I want to ask a question. All we'd had is this true description of their situation. And I said, does the Lord of history need a congregation on this street corner? And like a choir-trained yes came out of a whole bunch at one. Everybody answered it at the same time. Well, it's kind of surprising. I said, well, that leaves the second question. Why does the Lord of history need a congregation sitting on the street corner? And they did the same thing. AIDS, just like that. And everybody, one word, all of a sudden. And I thought, it takes about 2 years for a church to focus like that. And that's when I discovered the grand plan. Their work on that had brought them together to a hopeless situation of HIV/AIDS was taking people out. There was no money in the hospitals for it. They did not know what the definition was. The doctors couldn't write down the diagnosis because the Center for Disease Control in Atlanta kept changing the definition for it. And they didn't know when the condition of this patient matched the CDC's description definition for it. And even if they could put it down, they didn't know what to do about it. There was no medicine for it. It was a total surprise. They did not have anything to counteract it. And of course, they get real busy trying to work out, they called it a cocktail of pills that you had to take at a given time. But when I asked, why does the Lord of history need a church on this corner? They said AIDS. And I said, well, I want to tell you something that I've learned. You can ignore economic demons for a while. They'll tear your pants off you. Phone company needs its money, electric company needs it, water people need their money. We don't argue about that. We just can't pay it, and we're going to ignore that. That makes us understand that whatever we do about AIDS, we start out broke, in debt, beggars. We are nobody. Whatever we do, we have to beg for help. But we're going to make a plan, and it's got to be a good one. It's got to be on target, and you're the one that knows the answer. We had doctors sitting there, dentists sitting there, lawyers sitting there, business people sitting there, gay people sitting there, and they, I said, you know what to do about it. and we'll figure that out together. But nobody is to say how we're going to pay for it. Nobody brings that up. We don't know how we're going to pay for it. But you don't ever ask the church to do something easy to do. You ask the church to do what it takes a miracle to do. And we're going in as beggars. And I believe whatever we need to pay for it will be there if we get the plan right. We can sell it to the city. And we created an enormous plan. The support group was easy. We started it immediately because it didn't take money to start it. You take volunteers and a covered dish dinner and you're on your way, with meeting where they are told something that matters, either about AIDS or about the condition and how you're doing, and hopelessness and all that, despair. But you go into groups and you work together on this and let the medical community do their work, and they'll make it some way. They always do, and we depend on them for that. But we want to do what a church can do, and we want to show the city how to respond to AIDS. And every time anybody does it right, we want to make that public. We want the city to see how you respond to AIDS. And we had them eat food prepared by HIV to counteract the fear. You had to do that to be a part of the group. And we had some of the most marvelous things go on around that. There's a man named Frank who owned a bar down on Times Boulevard in the Rice community, Rice University community. He didn't have AIDS. He showed up here and found out that we had a problem of big spoons, serving spoons in the kitchen. They always disappear. People get, they just stick to people, I guess, when they leave. But there's no big spoons. You don't have any serving spoons. He went down, got him a big suitcase, and bought a whole bunch of great big spoons. He'd put them in that suitcase, and he'd bring them up here. He wasn't a member of this church. We had to call everything Bearing and Friends because there were so many friends helping us. He'd bring those spoons up here and he'd put them in the dishes so people could serve, and then he would pick them up, wash them, put them back in his suitcase, and take them back down to his bar. Every Wednesday night he was here with that, Frank. And he probably, when he dies, will that bar to this church. He let us use it for everything in the world. And we had good use for it. We had people with talent that put on programs and shows and celebrates things. But he'd always just open his door and let Bearing Church use it. But that's Frank, and he I don't know where he is now, but he was a fantastic man. Of course, the spoons wasn't all he did. He was here doing, and the spoons were just his. He knew the answer was to put them in the suitcase and take them home with him. Well, we had that kind of stuff going on, and it was just amazing what all happened. And I remember we had to deal with housing, we had to deal with daycare. Created a daycare center for adult patients, and ended up with a nurse on duty to take care of the cocktail of pills that had to be taken at certain times. They had a sharp time limit on that, and they had to take it, and needed a nurse to help handle that. One of the fantastic stories is one of the church committees was dissolved, and they called me and said they had $15,000 and they were going to send it over here, and I said, can I use it to fix the air conditioning? They said no, it goes directly to pay for rent and telephone bills and electric bills of patients, because we had identified that we needed a part of that daycare center. We needed money to help people stay in their apartments. They had a small apartment, and the unit next to the church, apartment unit, were single bedroom apartments, and we almost bought it twice, but we never quite got that one worked out. But we did get money to pay rent, cash money, and we went to HUD and explained to them that it was cheaper to pay rent, telephone, and keep them in the apartment than it would be to get them off the street after they lost their apartment. And would you believe $200,000 a year, $300,000 a year, $400,000 a year? HUD loved what we were doing. And they, through the years that developed, would come and look at what Bering was doing and how they were handling their bookkeeping, and everything was beautifully streamlined. The highest percent of money was going straight into the need that it was given for. And cash money from HUD to pay bills. They trusted us with that money. I would have never guessed they would have done that. But they trusted this church. The state came over to examine the daycare center. We had a social worker out there named Jody Huckabee, who now, by the way, runs PFLAG in the national organization, PFLAG. And I had carried my little dab. That $15,000 made me a social worker. And the time that it takes to sit down and interview people and try to decide which one needs how much of that money, and just quadruples the time you have to put in on things. And Jody showed up as a licensed social worker, and I carried this. We had about $7,000 left, and I carried it over to him, and I said, Jody, make this work better, streamline this, give it good sense. And he did. And But the state came over and examined our books and things, and they came over to see me and said, we have a problem. We are paying, I think they were paying about $27,000 on his salary, and we can't have him using any of his time to give away church money. I said, well, that makes me appreciate the state. For you to be that clear, I understand the problem. You can't mix, and you can't be paying a guy who's giving away church money. But I said, the money's gone, so we don't have to worry. There'll be no more. That's all there was. We just had $15,000, and it's all gone. And I gave away first half, and he gave away the last half, and now we're dependent on HUD and you, the state. And so the idea that they were that clear about everything and went through those books, and that makes them respect this church, that we were that clear about their problem with the way in which things were working. And so I developed a rather healthy appreciation for those people. That was the daycare center, and the paying to keep people off the street in their apartments. That was just one corner of that plan. And a man in the meeting said, could we put a dental clinic in this church? And I thought it was the craziest idea I ever heard in my life. I said, why? Of course, I'm not a dentist, and he told me why, and it took him about 10 minutes. And the gums and the teeth have a whole lot to do with your health. And the soft gums in the mouth is one of the early places that you detect the influence of AIDS on the body. And well, I realized my question came out of ignorance. Why? So we put out invitation to 85 people, including the doctor who found the first case in Houston, and 84 dentists. And 84 people showed up in a room where we were going to put a dental clinic in. They had been looking for it, and this dentist knew they'd been looking for it because they didn't have a place to send AIDS patients, and they could not treat them in their own chairs. The fear was total. The knowledge of it was nothing. And every patient they had would refuse to come if they knew they were treating patients with the AIDS virus. So when we put in a dental clinic, they gave us all of the dental equipment that they could break up chairs and in the meeting, and I knew nothing about any of it, but the dentist who did not want to be on camera, I had to learn to be careful for them. And I've never been careful for anything in my life, so I was really unskilled at being careful. But I couldn't expose them to the camera, but they were trying to feed me information from the room right there through the doorway. And they said, tell them that we need an X-ray machine. We've got one that floats. And I didn't know what an X-ray machine had that floated, except wouldn't be still, maybe. The young man in the middle stood up and said, "Doctor, don't worry about your x-ray machine. My family, all of my family makes their living fixing those things, and yours will be the best one in town." "It won't float," he said. So, every time we identified something we needed, somebody did that. Dental clinic, we opened on a Sunday afternoon, had the bishop out here to cut that ribbon. 1987, 1 year from the time of that meeting, that dental clinic was open and ready to go. Now, everybody scrambled for everything we could get. And everybody was focused on the plan and what we needed, and any way they could dig up a connection somewhere to make it work. I went over to see the plumbers union. They've got the gosh awfulest name on that plumbers union. They got about 8 letters that make no sense to anybody else but a plumber. But it's the identification of their union. And I stepped into the office. It was about 10 minutes to 12 o'clock noon, and met the man who was surprising to me, a rather young man, in his 30s looked like. And there was a friend of his there who they were getting ready to go to lunch. They've been college roommates, and they were going to go to lunch, and I thought, well, I'll probably have to catch them at a different time, but I told them who I was and what I was about. They said, "This is for that church that's going to put in a dental clinic. You need pipes and plumbers to..." They skipped lunch, came with me straight over to this church, went through those Sunday school rooms in that building where the dental clinic had to be put. And the second man was the head man over inspection of plumbing in Houston. He got in on the ground floor of that, and we had no trouble getting our stuff, getting it put, and getting it inspected. They were all in on it from the beginning, but they missed lunch that day. I'm sure they, being head of a union, he got lunch at 2 o'clock, but they sent over a plumber with half his salary paid. He had some unemployed plumbers in the downturn. And they sent all of the black pipe, they call it, which they need for the gas lines. And we had to raise half a plumber's salary to pay him. And St. Luke's United Methodist Church had given us $15,000 cash. And we had that in hand to go out and buy the copper tubing. And we went, got it, their plans, how much we needed, what we needed. We got it on this truck at the building supply place, or the plumbing place. And we were leaving, going out to the gate where you pay. Here comes the owner out. And he said, "Is this for that church?" And we said, "Yes." he tore the paper up, said, "Don't charge these people anything for whatever they need." That was my life for 10 years, watching that happen. It's amazing. And we must have got $25,000 out of that $15,000. It was $5,000 cash, and we couldn't spend it. Nobody wanted our money. Nobody wanted it. We saw a lot of miracles. Well, I must tell you a funny one. In that room that night, we were in that meeting and we were putting this stuff together. We came over to the building to look at the Sunday school rooms, and in one of the buildings, while sitting in that room planning, I knew that we needed some strange things to happen that impressed people, that were unexplainable. And that was going to be my department. Where would I make that happen? And didn't know. But when we came into these rooms and we opened the closet in the room that used to be where you counted the money in the Sunday school, and there was this big, heavy iron safe in that closet that had been built around it, and the door, it wouldn't come out the door, so we thought, we'll never get that thing out. The door's too small. My first miracle clicked into place. I knew that at midnight that night, a Methodist preacher with a big car jack was going to show up and take the facing off the door, peel it back until it was smaller than the safe, put that jack under it and pull it out and set it in the hallway, replace the door without any hammer marks on it. Come to work the next morning. "Don, you know that thing we saw out there? It's sitting out in the hall." It was about 3 years before I told anybody about what happened. It was at the time that they were opening a big safe somewhere. They had crashed a wall of some big criminal, and they had a newsman was going to have a program and open this safe, and it was during that same time. We had a lot of fun. We couldn't get that thing open, and they opened the one on the news, and there wasn't anything in it, and sure enough, we finally got somebody that take that safe apart and open it up, and nothing in it either, but we had a little fun with the news and that big old safe, but nobody knew how that safe got out of there. But I knew when I saw it, I could move it. And it's more than a joke. It caused people to turn toward impossible possibilities. And for something just to happen that the night before it said was really going to be hard to do. We needed that kind of inspiration just to show up. And all this other stuff that was happening about spending $5,000, and they wouldn't take our money. The city loved us. Because again, this congregation was showing the city how to respond to AIDS. And I didn't know that long story back behind that, the history. And a young man came in my office that worked for a little newspaper, and I don't even know the name of that, but He said, I want to do a story on this church. And I thought he's talking about the AIDS work. He said, no, I want to go back into your records. And can I get your records of the past? And I said, well, I don't even know where they are, but if we can find them, you can have them, you know, because they'll be old trustees' records and things we store. He took them and he came back with that long story, and I said, man, you're popping my bubble. I thought we was doing something extraordinary here, and we're just carrying on a tradition. This church has always been that way. So I wasn't surprised to learn that during the 1960s, this church had moved out here to where it's now located in the 20s, had built the new sanctuary in 27 or 8 and 9, and they noticed that it was during the 60s when the long-haired hippie was moving into Montrose. And here they were moving among the gays, and the church met one Sunday afternoon. They called for a meeting to examine this issue of why people, church people, non-church people, hated these hippies and these gay people. This church in the 60s, German Christians, said, we see no reason for this, no justification at all for this, and we will never discriminate against these people. They are welcomed in our house. The word got out in the 60s, and I had a lot of people ask me, Don, how did you do that so fast? And I said, I didn't do that. It was done long before I came by a bunch of faithful Christians. And I think of them every time the invitation is given at Bering Church on Sunday morning. That long list of things that describe people's life situations. You are not only welcome here, you are celebrated here, and it leaves nobody out, just like they said it in 1960s. We will not discriminate against people. And the word got out, and it takes a while for the homosexual community to believe that, because they'd run into so much of the other. But when they came, those old German white-headed people met them at the door, greeted them, welcomed them, unequivocally open to their being here. And when I came, the chairman of the board was a lesbian. Everybody knew that and was proud of her. She brought me books to help me get acquainted with knowledge of what it meant to say homosexual. And I'd already dealt with personally that I was kind of where this church was in 1960. I will in no way discriminate against these people. I didn't understand it. But that's not what you have to know. What you have to know is the gospel. That's what makes that happen. and Becky Lee. Then, to move a little further down history and make connection with that setup, Becky was the chairman of the board. And someone gave money to put an angel statue in the yard of the church. We had people who every year would work on that yard and were trying to beautify it and keep it that way. It needed a lot of work, and someone gave the money to pay for an angel being put out there. Well, the church got divided over whether or not this church ought to have an angel, a little bit too Catholic, you know. Well, we showed them one at St. Luke's Church or St. Paul's Church or some other church, but that didn't settle it. The old-timers just felt rather squeamish about Methodist Church putting an angel out in its yard, a stone angel, an idol of some kind, you know. Well, the homosexual members didn't have any problem with that at all. They thought it was culturally interesting and quality thing to do, but it was dividing up. Everyone was dividing up, and they set up a time at the board meeting when they would vote on this. And this put everybody to work, especially the gray-headed Germans who set the tone and invitation and made it live. They were against it. And they were trying to get their people here for that board meeting to vote against it. And they couldn't get enough. And here we sat, room full of people, small group of gray heads, large group of homosexual people. Becky had her agenda. We came to that item and said, vote on the angel. And Becky said, we're not going to vote on that angel. Just took it upon herself as chair to not do that. They went back to the person that gave the money for the angel and talked them into putting in a sprinkler system. So this church has a marvelous sprinkler system out there. But that's how love answers issues. We never have voted on that angel. Well, the plans made in that room were of a massive, multiple-pronged AIDS work. And I put it all on a page that said what the problem was and what we saw as the solution. And over on the right-hand side was a big blank spot of where does the money come from, what the problem is, what the solution is, and blank spot for the money. And I put that all on a page, and I called the bishop. And I said, I need to meet with the cabinet. I've never met with the cabinet but one time in my life, and that was it. And I wanted them to see what we were doing and help me find the money to pay for that. And I wanted them laughing when I started, and I was trying to think of a joke that would do. And I had one, but I didn't think it was too good. But I carried my forms, and the bishop said, well, Don, we're glad to see you. I appointed you out to Bering Church, and I thought maybe you'd fallen in a hole or something. I hadn't heard from you. I said, well, Bishop, I've got a program I want to present to the cabinet. He said, all right. A man named Leon Mathis, old friend, was on that cabinet. And he said, Don, what did you ever do with that high church thing that Ron Poe left you out there? And I said, well, Leon, you can be high church in one weekend, but you do have to practice all day Saturday. And they just died laughing at that. That's what I did. I practiced all day Saturday because I had never done a service like Ron had, and it was beautiful. It was just fits here. And you couldn't tear it out of Bering's life now. It's too fine. But they got excited about the plan. A federal judge named Woodrow Seals, who's been a friend of mine a long time, and he got into Falk. What was his name? Falk. He's a playwright. He was an English professor from the University of Texas that began to write plays, and it would have several characters in it, but he was all the characters. And he put this stuff on the stage, humor. And he got interested. Judge Seals got him interested in this. He came out here and did research with people. What does it do to your gut to be told you have AIDS? And talk about that. Or what does it do to your head? And one of them said, Dr. Falk, we can't imagine you doing humor with this stuff. He says, oh, you can do things with humor that they would kill you if you did it any other way. But humor gets you by, and we're going to do it with humor. He was going to write the play and get it on, and he said, but before I start, I want to contact a friend of mine that has two problems. One of them is that she divorced her husband and only got $28 million and her divorce settlement. And the other one is she thinks John Henry Falk is wonderful. And she's not a liberal, but she's got a big heart. She will be with us in this one, I promise you. John Henry got sick, but this celebrity, Carolyn Barb, got interested, and we put people around her that would help her do whatever she thought of doing. And she put us on billboards. She put us on city buses. She tried to get us on the rear end of taxis. She says, who does that? If she was riding in a taxi with the two guys that were with her, two Randys we called them, and she said, who decides what goes on the rear end of those taxis? And she was just riding through the city of Houston looking for ways to put us on. John Henry Falk got sick, and they marked him up with a purple pencil and were x-raying his head, and he died not too long. He was in Chicago with his play. Broadway in New York was talking to him about it. several characters. He was all the characters, and I never saw one of his plays, but he great success with it. He got us to Carolyn, and she put us on the map. She said, let's not worry about John Henry, he's sick. And he was headed for Chocolate Bayou Theater. I've never seen Chocolate Bayou Theater, but he was going in there with his play for us. Let's go after the big theater downtown. She thinks big. And they gave us the opening night proceeds in October 1987, $103,000. We ordered supplies. We couldn't get money to order supplies for the dental clinic. We had it ready. We ordered supplies and opened that thing, and the bishop came out and cut the ribbon and said, thank you, Don, for saving this church. I wasn't sure whether I had saved the church or the church had saved me. I just knew we had been in something together that really mattered and would matter forever and ever. So when Ed Cordray stopped me about a year ago on the parking lot and said, Don, and stuff we were doing back then was tremendous. It's been 20 years ago, and he still feels that, how powerful that was. Greatest 10 years of my ministry.